When you make a new friend from another country, it's probably really exciting. But it's important to remember that people who come from another country have different manners and traditions from people in your country. To show respect to your new friend and their family, you should try to learn about some of their manners and traditions. For example, in many Asian cultures, when someone invites you to their house, you must take off your shoes before you enter their house. You should try to bring a small gift to that person's house. Nobody's perfect, and people will not expect you to know all of their manners and all of their traditions. But if you don't try to learn about some of these things, your new friend and their family might think you're a little bit rude. You might have noticed when I was talking about manners that I used some special words like must, should, and might. These words are special kinds of verbs called modal verbs. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about how we use each of these different modal verbs, and also how to make sentences with modal verbs. First, let's talk about when we use must. Must is used in situations where we express orders, rules, or obligations. Obligations are situations where we have no other choice. For example, in Japan, you must take off your shoes before you enter someone's house. It's an obligation and a rule that is part of Japanese culture. You have no other choice when you enter someone's house. You must take off your shoes first. Now let's talk about the form of sentences with must. We have the subject, which in this sentence is you, the modal verb must, and the main verb of the sentence. In this sentence, the main verb is take off. And finally, the complement, which we can also call the rest of the sentence. Now let me tell you something super cool about sentences with must. I can change the subject of the sentence and make a sentence like, I must take off my shoes. Or, your sister must take off her shoes. Or we can even say, Ben and Kim must take off their shoes. So, no matter whether the subject is I, your sister, your brother, your dog, your classmates, or even Superman, must and the main verb have the same form in all of these sentences. You might already know that must has a negative form. The negative form of must is must not, or the short form mustn't. We use this negative form of must in sentences like, in Brazil, you must not, or mustn't, give the OK signal. This is the OK signal. The form of sentences with must not or mustn't is very similar to sentences with must. First, the subject, plus must not or mustn't, plus the main verb, and finally the complement or the rest of the sentence. Now, let's talk about when we use the modal verb should. Should is used in situations where we are giving advice or a strong suggestion. So basically, anytime you say to a friend or family member that something is a good or bad idea, you should use the modal verb should in your sentence. Here's an example. In China, you should bring a gift the first time you visit a friend's house. It's not an obligation and it's not a rule, but it is a strong suggestion and it is a good idea. So, if you go to a friend's house in China, you should bring a small gift. Like I said before, the forms of sentences with modal verbs are all pretty similar. We have the subject, then the modal verb should, then the main verb, and finally the complement or rest of the sentence. Oh yeah, and don't forget what I told you before. When we change the subject, the rest of the sentence is exactly the same. So you could say, we should bring a gift, or I should bring a gift, or your family should bring a gift. And the modal verb and the main verb stay the same. Of course, as you can probably imagine, should also has a negative form. The negative form of should is should not, or its short form, shouldn't. It appears in sentences like this. You should not, or you shouldn't, talk while you eat. It's probably a bad idea when you're eating with people from many different countries to talk while you're eating your French fries. So you definitely shouldn't talk while you eat. Again, the form of sentences with shouldn't or should not is pretty similar to other modal verbs. Again, we have the subject plus should not or shouldn't plus the main verb plus the complement or rest of the sentence. To talk about the final type of modal verb, we're going to go back to the situation I mentioned before of talking while you're eating. Let's imagine that you're eating a giant slice of pizza and your friend has this reaction. You don't know for sure if your friend is going to do something or what she is going to say about the fact that you have a giant piece of pepperoni pizza in your mouth while you're telling her about your science test. When you don't know what is going to happen exactly, but you have a good idea about it, then you can use one of a trio of modal verbs to express possibilities. You can use the modal verb might, the modal verb may, or the modal verb could in these contexts. When you say or write sentences, you can use any of these three verbs, and they pretty much mean the same thing. When we're talking about your friend who is watching you talk while you eat, you could say, she may think you are rude if you talk while you eat. She might think you are rude if you talk while you eat. She could think you are rude if you talk while you eat. The form of sentences with might, may, and could is pretty easy to remember because it follows the same form as other sentences with modal verbs. Remember, we can change the subject to just about anything, but the part with the modal verb and the part with the main verb will still have the same form no matter what the subject is. Modal verbs are important and useful, and we can use them in many different situations. Now, you must do exercises 6, 7, and 8. You should do these exercises carefully if you want to do a good job. And when you do these exercises, you might or may or could realize that actually they are quite easy. Good luck, and see you next time.